Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, the young upstart who ousted a 10-term Democrat, the fourth highest ranking Democrat, is out. I gotta say, there is such, what's the word I'm looking for? I want to say catharsis, it's what I used before, but man, is there that visceral, emotional satisfaction seeing one of these old powers that be removed. The Democrats are facing a reckoning. And I've said that a bunch, but I gotta say, I disagree with a lot of Alexandria Ocasio's policies, but I just absolutely love this. It's similar to when Trump won the presidency. Personally, I don't like Trump. I don't like his policies. Don't like Hillary Clinton either. Bernie was more my guy, so naturally you can see that I'm kind of favorable towards Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. So there's a lot going on here emotionally. These elitist old people who think they're going to win, they don't bother showing up to debates. That's what happened in this case. So I'll just say it right now. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, nobody knew who she was, and Joe Crowley apparently didn't even show up for 2 debates, so confident they're going to win. And then something else happened, right? So Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, she was on Late Night with Colbert, whatever the show's called, and they actually make reference to the fact that the polls aren't always correct. So I have the story, it's from Mediaite, and right here, Stephen Colbert began by admitting that he didn't know her name, and on Monday, and expressed his shock at how she was 36 points behind in the polls, but ended up 15 points ahead. He said, "Why do you think you were able to swing 51 points in 3 weeks and unseat this man who had been there 20 years? Cortez responded, "Well, I think the first thing to kind of mention is that I don't think polling is always right." And then in the clip, they laugh because, yeah. People try to identify who's the most likely person to turn out, and what we did is we changed who turns out, and that changes the whole election. Sound familiar? There were these establishment Democrats, these old political, industry people who knew Hillary Clinton was going to win because they were polling likely voters. And what Trump did, he got people to vote who normally don't vote. And this is what everybody was talking about before the election. They said that areas that typically have low voter turnout were lighting up. And so we end up now with a very similar story, but kind of in another direction. There are a decent amount of people. I don't know the exact percentage, but I think it was something like 20% of Bernie supporters went for Trump because Bernie and Trump actually have some overlap. I know a lot of people are going to freak out and say never, but no, Bernie was opposed to a lot of these trade deals, and so was Donald Trump. Bernie wanted to bring work back into the United States, and so did Donald Trump. And if you're somebody you're a single issue voter and jobs is your issue, Bernie was your guy because he had a lot of, populist ideals. But without him, what do you do? Vote for Hillary? No, she wants these free trade agreements, so they went Trump. Well, now we have Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. Same thing basically happened. She went out, she got people to vote, and the pollsters, these old school types, they never saw it coming because they're not paying attention. Different people came out to vote. So Colbert inquired about her agenda, as she has described herself as a democratic socialist, which he told her is not an easy term for a lot of Americans. I completely agree. He asked her what being a democratic socialist means to her, and she said, "For me, democratic socialism is about, really the value for me is that I believe that in a modern, moral, and wealthy society, no person in America should be too poor to live. So what that means is healthcare is a human right. It means every child, no matter where you are born, should have access to a college or trade school education if they so choose it. And I think that no person should be homeless if we can have public structures and public policies to allow for people to have homes and food and lead a dignified life in the United States." Watch the clip above. You don't need to hear that. Basically, she's a socialist. And a lot of people gave me flack because in my video, the thumbnail said, "Congress sees a socialist victory." Democratic socialist is just a specific kind of socialist. Bernie Sanders is considered to be a social democrat. Big difference. Let me break it down for you. A social democrat like Bernie Sanders believes in the kind of capitalism that exists in Scandinavia. Scandinavia is not socialist. It is not. Denmark, Sweden, Norway, no, none of it. They are social democrats. That means they believe in capitalism, but they believe in high taxes to support a welfare state. Significant difference. Socialism believes in giving the means of production to the worker. Ultimately, the democratic socialists of America seek to abolish capitalism. Anti-capitalism is a big piece of their platform. At least according to Wikipedia, it lists anti-capitalism as something they're striving for. Socialists do not believe in capitalism. Plain and simple. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez is not like Bernie Sanders in that regard. She's actually much further to the left. Now, democratic socialism is not authoritarian, all right? So that's the difference. When they say democratic, what they're meaning is it's slightly below the center line on the political compass. What that means, when they institute some kind of democratic socialism, you get to vote on whether or not certain things are put into place, as opposed to authoritarian socialism and authoritarian communism, where they kind of just tell you what you can and can't do, and then make you do it. So, there was a tweet that went out the other day from Andrew Lawrence. I don't know who this person is, but it's got 38,000 retweets. And they said, Sean Hannity just presented this agenda as a negative. And this is Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez's platform. I am going to now explain to you why I am not a democratic socialist and why I do not agree with them. I am more in line with like Bernie Sanders, social democrat kind of thing, but maybe Bernie's a little bit more left than I am. I just did my like 8 values thing, and my equality is slightly higher than my market. But pretty much when it comes to equality and market, I'm like 50-50. I think ultimately I'm like 54% in favor of like regulation and things like that. So, but let me explain this to you. You don't have to agree with me. By all means, think I'm wrong. Comment below. Tell me I'm stupid. I'm always up to understanding more, learning things, and I assure you, in this conversation that we're about to have, I'm going to miss a ton of points. I don't think I'm the smartest person in the world, but I want to raise some things about, first of all, this tweet. Sean Hannity just presented this agenda as a negative. Yeah, well, no shit. Sean Hannity is a conservative. A lot of these things don't jive well with conservatives, and obviously not all of them. So let's go through the first one. Medicare for all. It's really vague. Okay, so let me just point out, these are really vague terms that kind of highlight an idea. In terms of Medicare for all, are we talking about abolishing private insurance? Personally, I'm not for that. Medicare for all, not a bad idea if what we're talking about is a public option, meaning that people can choose to pay for a government insurance plan. To me, that makes sense. Getting rid of all other insurance and only having one provider makes no sense. I like the idea of people having a public option and a private option simply because then there's more competition, and it allows the government to have a system in place where effectively you have the community voting on how it should function, almost in line with like a nonprofit kind of system. At the end of the day, though, my gripe, my issue with this idea of universal healthcare is that what you're really saying is you want to take away people's choices in terms of how and where they go for insurance. When I look at Medicare, when I look at these systems, it's basically the same thing. You know, you pay in, you know, a premium per month per paycheck, and then you're told if you get sick, you can go and your services are covered because that's what insurance is for. There are a lot of problems with private insurance. It's often really expensive and doesn't cover enough of what you need covered. The idea of like universal healthcare is, you know, grant people more protections. Pre-existing conditions will be covered. A lot of private carriers don't do that. So what we saw with Obamacare was an attempt to try and reconcile this idea. Do we need the government to run healthcare? No, we just need to guarantee that pre-existing conditions and rates go down. That hasn't really happened. So ultimately, Medicare for all, as a public option, by all means, give people the choice to buy into the government. Sure, why not? Choice is great. And let the private industry do its thing. I'm not an expert. I'm not a doctor. So don't take my word for it. Just my opinion. But let's move down to the more to where I think things kind of don't really work, right? So housing as a human right. Okay, the problem I have with the idea of guaranteeing healthcare, jobs, and housing as a human right is that these are things that have to come from other people. There's a big difference in saying, listen, if you bake cakes and somebody is, gay and wants a cake, you are participating in a public business and you should have to bake a cake. You should be able to discriminate against somebody. The reason I lean in favor of, look, just bake the person the cake is that if we start removing consumer protections in this sense, I fear we end up in an extremely tribalist society where, look, people say, oh, it's economic suicide to refuse services. No, people will still do it. In the civil rights era, we had to mandate that businesses had to serve people regardless of their race. And I think, Honestly, it's a tough call because I am more libertarian, but I'm concerned about a breakdown of civil society, in which case, maybe if you want to participate in public with a shop on the street that people can walk past, public roads, public infrastructure, you should serve the public and you shouldn't discriminate. But I don't think it's absolute. Again, I tend to be like 51% on the issue because the only reason I actually have an opinion on the matter is because I'm worried about the tribalism and the potential for civil war. Now, as for housing as a human right, medical care, and jobs, this is different. How do you guarantee a right to a building? You can't do it because buildings have to be serviced. They have to exist. No one is saying a cake is a human right. They're saying if a business exists, then, and they have the opportunity to produce something for you, they should do it. They shouldn't discriminate. Businesses should have a right to discriminate for certain reasons, like you're an asshole. You're loud and obnoxious, get out of my store. But if you're calm and peacefully trying to say, hey, I like a cake, and it just so happens that the person is gay, you should probably do it. There's an issue then if, let's say, there's no one available to build a house. Okay, how do you guarantee someone a human right to a house if literally no one can do it? Are you then going to force someone to become a construction contractor or whatever to build the house? If there is no human available to build that house, you can't guarantee it to anybody, in which case housing is not a human right. Not only that, but housing has to be maintained. So let's say you even get to the point where you're like, you know what, we've got old houses, let's put people inside them. Okay, what if those houses fall apart and those people get hurt? It's not that simple. I do think we should do more to make sure people have access to homes, but calling it a human right is dangerous territory because if the house doesn't exist, you can't give it to someone, and if there's no one to build it, you can't force them to do it. The same is true for medical treatment. Sure, if a doctor is available and you go to the emergency room, they have to treat you. You'll have debt, and there's a lot of problems with these debts, but they do have to treat you, so you are guaranteed, And then they also have, this Hippocratic Oath, doctors do no harm. And I think genuinely that most doctors and medics and medical practitioners, they do want to help people and they'll do their best so long as they can maintain the infrastructure. Back to my old argument. What happens when there's no doctors available? What happens when there's no hospitals available? You can't guarantee someone healthcare is a human right if the infrastructure doesn't exist, in which case, I'll give you this analogy. If you put someone in the middle of the woods, they have a right to free speech. They have a right to assembly. They have a right to confront accusers. They have all of these rights that naturally exist because they can say whatever they want. They can do whatever they want. If they start getting violent, that's not a right. But basically, rights are things that are abstract. They exist in us intrinsically, and their actions we can partake. But guaranteeing housing, okay, put someone in the middle of the woods and then tell them housing is a human right. And then I'm going to sit there and stare at my watch and wait for that house to physically manifest. No, somebody has to build it. And the same is true for medical care, medical treatment. Put somebody in the middle woods, say, here's your list of rights. Free speech, say whatever you want. They will. Okay, now assemble somewhere. Yes, they're literally doing that now. Okay, now treat the bloody wound on your leg. Sure, they can do it themselves, but a doctor is going to poof. No, it's not going to happen. And you can't make someone else do it. It's just, if the service doesn't exist, you can't mandate it. That's a problem. As for the federal jobs guarantee, this is also a problem. Money is not infinite. Money is finite. All of these things seem to overlook the fact that you can't just put someone in a job. There's no just job. You can't be like, hey, we're going to put you here and then give you food. No, food has to be exchanged for something, and there has to be incentives. And this is kind of why socialism doesn't work. I'm not an expert on socialism, but at least one of the holes I see is when the government starts taking too much food away from certain sectors so they can guarantee someone get something for their work, it starts breaking down other areas, right? This is why we function in a capitalist society. We have money, you want something, you trade something for something else, you trade something for something else, and then ultimately the needs are essentially spread out through a distributed system. The problem with socialism and communism is that they're what's called a command economy, and that's where, or a planned economy. It's where somebody plans out how things should function. But you have to convince me then that an individual or a committee or some group is going to process the economy, is going to plan it better than a distributed network of individuals. So when we talk about distributed computing, it's a similar analogy I want to use. Take 100 small computers and they can process information as quickly as one supercomputer, right? The numbers don't mean anything. I'm just giving you an example. Many small computers can be as good as one big computer. So when we're talking about an economy and you have hundreds of millions of people all trading, money here and there, That's a distributed economy. That's people who are planning things based on just market needs, and as things flow, things go up, things go down, and it's not perfect. It's absolutely not. But you enter a real problem then when you try and get a small group of people to plan out the entire economy for hundreds of millions of people, and it just won't work. And that's why we see starvation in a lot of these countries. It's why Venezuela is doing as bad as it is. Fortunately, you can't plan things better than a massive network of tens of millions of people. You need to let the system function as it is with regulation. And that's why I am a liberal. I think the 8 Values thing said I'm a social liberal, not a social democrat, not a democratic socialist, though I do, kind of lean more towards Bernie. The issue being, we need environmental protections, otherwise we have the avalanche effect. No snowflake in an avalanche blames itself for the avalanche, but that's what happens, it does. So it's stupid to have a small group of people try and plan an economy. But it's smart to have a small group of people watching the economy and then saying, hey, there are holes in these places that aren't being addressed by general market needs, and then trying to patch them up. Ultimately, I do think we have an issue with corruption and cronyism when it comes to regulation, and sometimes regulation is emotional and not logical, so these problems exist. But I think a mix of systems is better than the extreme of one or the other, because I think we'll just end up springing crazy leaks, and I don't buy into the argument that the market solves all the problems, because, look, it doesn't. We had I can't remember which river, it was like a river in Ohio burst into flames because all these different companies were dumping chemicals into it and saying, yeah, but I only dump a little bit. Ultimately, someone's got to look over that and be like, hey, wait, guys, altogether, it's too much waste, and now we have flaming rivers, and that's how we end up with the Clean Water Restoration Act. So I tend to be a regulation kind of person, but I do think there's a problem with government services that can't die. Regulation to me makes sense, but things like the post office and other government services, when they do bad, we just throw more money into it, and that's not a good idea. Regulation makes sense, saying like, hey man, don't rip people off, don't snake oil, don't be a snake oil salesman, and stop dumping that, mercury into people's water. Makes sense. But when you try and provide a service and you're bad at it, you need to die. And that's where we end up with a problem in terms of government services. But let's move on. Gun control, assault weapons ban. Inherently not bad, right? So gun control can make sense. Assault weapons ban, not really gonna make sense. I don't think, in my opinion, there's a problem with requiring like a license and liability insurance for a firearm. We do it for cars. It's different because a car isn't considered a constitutional right. I understand. It's just my personal opinion that maybe a big solution to a lot of these problems is liability insurance. That will add another level of registration for a firearms in an individual, and it will help take care of accidental injuries and medical costs. So, huge step up. I don't think that the argument about if we get rid of guns, there'll be less accidental deaths, there'll be less murder. I'm like, criminals are going to figure it out, and we're a really big country, so I tend to lean away from blanket bans and all that stuff. I think that's a bad idea, but I do think we can have some sensible regulation in terms of keeping people safe and helping cover costs. There are some states where you can just show an ID, walk in, and file the paperwork, and then eventually you get your gun. And I don't know. This is not my opinion. Right? I should say I'm basing my opinion off of an interview I did with a gun instructor, where Emily and I went to a shooting range in Jersey. We got to fire some weapons, and the instructor actually told me that he thinks too many states are way too lax on how they on how you're able to buy guns, and they actually advocated for some more controls. They actually, I was told by this instructor, he's like actually like a national, like a nation's best sport shooting kind of guy, professional shooter, and he was saying that waiting a month to get a gun wasn't difficult. Like he said, in Jersey it might take you a month to get a gun, and I said, is that considered hard? And he goes, no, it's easy. And I was like, wow, waiting a month? To me that seems extreme, but I defer to them. If I'm told by a few instructors that they think we can do better in terms of gun control, I'm gonna have to agree with them, because I don't, what do I know? But we see this ban in Congress, and it's like handguns, like a Glock 17. I'm like, nah, you're getting too crazy. Let's go on. I don't have too much time left for this video, and this is going to be a long one. Criminal justice reform and an end to private prisons. Here. I totally agree with that. But let me go up now, and starting from here, I want to mention something. Guaranteed healthcare, guaranteed housing, a guaranteed job, and gun control. You can get all of that in prison. Yeah, go to prison and you get healthcare, food, a job, all that stuff taken care of for you. Should we have that same level of protection in the entire country? I don't know if it's possible, but ending private prisons, I totally agree with that. There have been issues where in Michigan, a judge was sending kids like for minor infractions into juvie, juvenile, whatever they call it, because they were getting kickbacks. I think it was more than one judge. They got caught. So, ultimately, I think we have a problem with private prisons who need to generate profit. In order to do so, they have to bring in prisoners. Prisons should be about rehabilitation, not retribution, and they should be public institutions, not private, or at least they should be nonprofit. And they should serve to end themselves. The goal of a prison should be to not exist, right? We want to get people back into society. We want them to be functioning members of society. We don't want to just punish people. And one of the big problems with prisons is that they just make more criminals because people go in there and they become hardened. They learn things. We have a huge problem with criminal justice in this country, hands down. Immigration justice, abolish ICE. I don't think that's a good idea. Abolishing ICE is overly simplistic, and I will say this, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez on her website does address the fact that INS existed before ICE. So if they want to abolish ICE and reinstate INS, that makes sense. But I don't know what immigration justice means. I think for the most part, most people in this country are totally down with legal immigration, and there's a concern over illegal immigration. Abolishing ICE only makes sense insofar as we reinstate INS or some other system to control for unlawful immigration and things like that. Solidarity with Puerto Rico. Who disagrees with that? Puerto Rico is a part of the United States. Hey, Puerto Rico, you're all Americans, man. Come over. We'll have a beer and play some video games together. And not even that. I mean, anyone's welcome to come hang out. But solidarity with Puerto Rico. Why does that even need to be in there? Mobilizing against climate change. I think there's a sensible way to mobilize against climate change. If you're on the side where you disagree, or you're on the side where you agree, hey man, let's avoid the entire debate over science. I personally agree with, or I should say, I'm going to err on the side of just let's go with the scientific community. But hey, let's invest in energy alternatives that can produce a higher return on energy investment, so that our economy can expand, so that we have more access to energy in the future. We don't have to worry about fossil fuels from other countries. We need to rephrase this. Telling people like we want to get away from coal and oil and stuff, yeah, it makes sense. We should actually focus it on economic incentives. Research into ways to develop energy that are beneficial to those who want to fight climate change and can generate a massive economic incentive to the United States. There we go. Win-win. Clean campaign finance. Here. Get the money out of politics, man. I understand the idea of like Citizens United. A lot of conservatives are for that. But however we can try and figure out how to end corruption and cronyism, I am down to do that. Look at what the DNC did to Bernie Sanders. I just absolutely hate elitism. I hate this crony BS. I want to hear real people with real honest opinions, but I also want to make sure that those representing us are smart and understand how to make a system work. It's a challenge, but I think too much of our politics is funded by total bullshit. And you get people who are going to be like, well, this lobby is going to support me, so I should support them back. And then, it's not just that. Politicians get supported based on their ideas. And then we end up with politicians who have certain ideas simply because a large industry supported them. It's sort of like market politics. So we do need to figure out how to clean up campaign finance. I don't know exactly what she means by that, but I agree with that. Higher education for all. Let's go back to the first one. We can't really guarantee that. There's too many people who want to go to college. There's not enough money for college, and college is in a crisis with student loans and all that stuff. How do we guarantee money to pay instructors, to pay professors, to pay to build the colleges that can hold all of the students if we're going to make it free? I think we need education, absolutely. We don't want people to be stupid. We want people to be educated, but I don't know if we can do it through a public system where it guarantees it all for free. Imagine if today college was free. Well, then every single person, or I should say, higher education for all also means that regardless of your previous education, regardless of if you pass the test, you're going to end up going into school not being smart enough. There's not going to be enough space. I don't know how we solve for that problem. I want people to be educated. Don't know if we can do it this way. Women's rights. That's a no-brainer. Unfortunately, I think Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez is probably going to lean too far into regressive territory in terms of women's rights. But I'm totally on board with equality for everybody. Human rights are deserving of all people, regardless of if you're LGBTQIA+, regardless of if you're a senior. Curb Wall Street gambling, restore Glass-Steagall. This I tend to lean in favor of. I'm not an expert, but my general understanding is that before they got rid of Glass-Steagall, it, you know what? I'm going to avoid getting into this because I'm probably wrong. So I'm going to say right here, yeah, Wall Street gambling. We shouldn't have excessive risk-taking on behalf of people's 401ks or pensions and things like that. But at the same time, I think it's a much more complicated issue than the average young person can understand. And I think, you know, when I talk to a lot of young people about why they support Bernie and DSA and things like that, they don't understand Wall Street. They don't understand how trading works. They don't understand trade volume or taxes. They don't understand why raising taxes can actually lower tax revenue. And the reason I want to avoid this is because I know very, very little about Glass-Steagall other than it removing it essentially allowed banks to use certain money from certain areas towards investing in Wall Street or things like that. But again, not an expert. Ultimately, I will say, from a political standpoint, I, for the most part, agree with Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez's platform. What concerns me is there's way too much guaranteeing human rights things for people, and money has to come from somewhere. And I'm also concerned with regressive ideology, which seems to be a part of her campaign. Hopefully that's not the case, but she is a socialist. I am not. And this is why, at the end of the day, if she ran for a higher seat, if she ran for the president, I would not vote for her. I wouldn't vote for a lot of people. I wouldn't vote for Trump. I wouldn't vote for Hillary. I almost voted for Bernie, but I still don't want to vote for him. If someone doesn't actually look like a good leader to me, I'm not going to vote for him. I'm not playing a political game. You know, a lot of people are like, if you didn't vote, you let Trump win, or if you voted for Trump, you helped him win. Like, I don't care. I didn't vote. End of story. This is a particularly long video, and now I just went through a bunch of opinions a lot of people have asked me about that I haven't talked about in the past, so if you made it through this far, wow, congratulations. Thanks for listening for the past half an hour, and there's going to be another video coming up in just a couple minutes on this channel. So I will see you there.